The thunder of hooves echoed across the valley like distant war drums, stirring Tessa Ainsley from her single-minded focus as she collected wildflowers along the creek bed. She straightened, clutching her woven basket, and shaded her eyes against the harsh Montana sun of 1878. It took a moment for her mind to register the vibration beneath her feet, and another precious second to comprehend what it meant. By then, the dust cloud rising over the ridge told the terrifying story: cattle, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, stampeding directly toward her with no sign of slowing. Tessa's throat closed with panic. The creek bed offered no protection, merely a shallow depression that would become a deadly trap once the cattle arrived. She spun, searching desperately for an escape route, her blue calico dress tangling around her legs as she stumbled toward higher ground. The nearest tree stood too far away, the nearest rock outcropping equally distant. Her lungs burned as she ran, knowing with grim certainty she wouldn't make it. The sound grew deafening, earth trembling beneath her boots. Tessa risked a glance over her shoulder and saw the first massive longhorns cresting the ridge, their eyes wild with fear, hooves churning the earth. Time slowed to an excruciating crawl as she realized death was thundering toward her with unstoppable force. "Hang on." A deep voice cut through the cacophony, followed by the sound of a horse's whinny. From the corner of her vision, Tessa saw a blur of movement, a chestnut stallion racing parallel to the Stampede. The rider, tall, broad-shouldered, with a determined set to his jaw, leaned dangerously from his saddle, extending his arm toward her. Tessa didn't hesitate. As the rider drew alongside, she dropped her basket, reached up with both hands, and felt strong fingers close around her wrist. With a powerful heave, he pulled her upward. Tessa scrambled desperately, her feet leaving the ground as the cowboy swung her onto the horse in front of him. His arm closed around her waist like an iron band, and he wheeled the stallion sharply away from the oncoming herd. "Hold tight," he shouted above the thunder, spurring his horse to greater speed. Tessa clutched the saddle horn, heart hammering as they raced across the open prairie. Behind them, the cattle stampeded past where she'd stood moments before, trampling everything in their path. For endless minutes, they rode hard until the cowboy finally slowed the exhausted horse to a walk. Only then did Tessa realize she was trembling uncontrollably, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "You're safe now, madam," the man said, his voice a low rumble against her back. "Those beeves won't be troubling us again." Tessa turned slightly in the saddle, getting her first proper look at her rescuer. Beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, she found herself staring into the most startling green eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face with strong, clean lines. A day's worth of stubble darkened his jaw, and a faint scar curved along his left cheekbone. "I thank you," she managed, her voice scarcely audible even to her own ears. "You saved my life, Mr. Vaughn," he replied, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Vaughn Ashwood." "And you're welcome, Miss Ainsley, Tessa Ainsley." She became acutely aware of his arm still around her waist, the solid warmth of his chest against her back. "I'm staying with my uncle in Silver Creek. I was just gathering flowers when," her voice faltered. "Mighty dangerous place for flower picking," Vaughn said, guiding his horse toward a gentle rise that would take them to the main trail. "Those cattle belong to the Rocking H. Someone must have spooked them. Been a dry summer, they're skittish as jackrabbits." "I didn't realize," Tessa said, color rising in her cheeks. "I've only been in Montana territory for 3 weeks. My uncle warned me not to wander too far, but—" She trailed off, embarrassed by her foolishness. Vaughn nodded, understanding in his gaze. "Eastern, aren't you?" "Boston, if I had to guess." "Philadelphia," Tessa corrected, surprised. "How did you know?" He shrugged, the movement slight but perceptible. "The way you talk, and those shoes aren't made for Montana dirt." Tessa glanced down at her once fine leather boots, now scuffed and stained. "No, I suppose they're not." She hesitated before adding, "I came west after my parents died. Typhoid. Uncle William is my only remaining family." "William Ainsley, the blacksmith?" Vaughn asked, surprise evident in his tone. "Yes. Do you know him?" "Everyone in Silver Creek knows your uncle." "Good man, fair prices." Vaughn adjusted his hat slightly. He never mentioned family coming. "It was rather sudden," Tessa admitted. "I rode ahead, but—" The trail widened as they approached Silver Creek, a settlement of perhaps 300 souls nestled in a valley between towering pine-covered mountains. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the sounds of civilization hammering from the blacksmith shop. A piano from the saloon. Children's laughter drifted toward them on the afternoon breeze. "I'll take you to your uncle's," Vaughn said, guiding his horse down the main street, drawing curious glances from townspeople who noted Tessa's disheveled appearance and their unusual shared seat on the saddle. William Ainsley emerged from his smithy as they approached, his massive forearms blackened with soot, gray-streaked beard glistening with sweat. His expression shifted from confusion to alarm as he took in the scene. "Tessa." "What in heaven's name?" "Your niece had a close call with the rocking H herd," Vaughn explained, dismounting smoothly before reaching up to help Tessa down. His hands encircled her waist, lifting her effortlessly to the ground. "Found her collecting flowers down by Cottonwood Creek." William's face paled beneath his tan. "The rocking H stampeded. Lord above, girl, you could have been killed." "She nearly was," Vaughn said, his tone matter-of-fact. "Pulled her up just in time." Tessa smoothed her rumpled dress, acutely conscious of the dust coating her from head to toe. "Mr. Ashwood saved my life, Uncle William." Her uncle stepped forward, extending a massive hand to Vaughn. "Then I'm in your debt, Ashwood, deeply in your debt." Vaughn shook the offered hand briefly. "No debt. Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone could have," William countered. "That took skill and courage." He glanced between them. "You must stay for supper at least. Let us thank you properly." For the first time, Vaughn looked uncomfortable. "Appreciate the offer, but I need to report back to the Circle B. Foreman will be wondering what happened to those cattle." "You work for the Circle B?" William asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Thought you rode for the Rocking H." "Changed outfits last month," Vaughn replied, mounting his horse once more. He tipped his hat to Tessa, his green eyes lingering on her face. "Miss Ainsley, might be wise to stay closer to town for your flower gathering." Tessa lifted her chin, embarrassment making her voice sharper than intended. "I'll certainly take that under advisement, Mr. Ashwood." A brief smile touched his lips, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. With a nod to William, Vaughn turned his horse and rode away, his straight back and broad shoulders silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. "Well," William said, guiding Tessa toward the small cabin behind his smithy, "seems you've had quite an adventure for your first month in Montana." Tessa watched Vaughn disappear down the street, an odd sensation taking root in her chest. "Yes," she murmured, "quite an adventure." She couldn't have known then that the real adventure was only beginning. For 3 days, Tessa found herself watching the street through the cabin window, startling at the sound of approaching horses. For 3 nights, she dreamed of thundering hooves and strong arms lifting her to safety. On the 4th day, she chided herself for such foolishness, and threw herself into helping her uncle with housekeeping and bookkeeping for his blacksmith business. Silver Creek might be small, but William Ainsley's skills were sought after throughout the county. Ranchers, miners, and travelers all brought their work to him, providing Tessa with ample opportunity to observe the colorful tapestry of Western life. She adapted quickly to the rustic routines, finding unexpected satisfaction in the simplicity of their days. A week after the stampede, Tessa was sweeping the porch when a familiar chestnut stallion appeared at the hitching post. Her heart performed a peculiar little skip as Vaughn Ashwood dismounted, removing his hat as he approached. "Miss Ainsley," he greeted, the afternoon sun highlighting the auburn tints in his dark hair. "Good to see you staying within town limits." Tessa leaned on her broom, lifting an eyebrow. "Mr. Ashwood, have you been appointed my guardian then?" The corner of his mouth twitched. "Just making an observation. My uncle is in the forge," she said, gesturing toward the smithy where the rhythmic clanging of hammer on metal rang out. "Actually, I came to see you," Vaughn said, his usual confidence seeming to waver. "Found something of yours." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew her woven basket, somewhat crushed but still intact. "Went back to look for strays and spotted this." "My basket," Tessa exclaimed, genuinely surprised as she accepted it. Their fingers brushed briefly, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. "I never expected to see it again. Thank you. Also found these." From inside his vest, he produced a small bundle of wildflowers, somewhat wilted but still recognizable as the prairie blossoms she'd been collecting. "They've seen better days, but thought you might want them anyway." Tessa stared at the simple gift, oddly touched by the gesture. In Philadelphia, she'd received elaborate bouquets from suitors, expensive hothouse flowers arranged by professional florists. None had affected her like these humble prairie blooms, rescued from a trampled creek bed. "That's very thoughtful," she said, accepting them carefully. "Would you like some coffee? It's the least I can offer for your trouble." Vaughn glanced toward the smithy, hesitating. "Don't want to intrude." "It's no intrusion," Tessa assured him, opening the cabin door. "Uncle William would be glad of the break, I'm sure." The interior of the cabin was simple but comfortable. Tessa had added feminine touches since her arrival: curtains sewn from fabric remnants, wildflowers in mason jars, and colorful quilts on the chairs. She gestured Vaughn toward the table while she stoked the fire in the cook stove and set the coffee pot to heat. "Your uncle's done well by you," Vaughn observed, looking around. "Place looks different than last time I saw it." Tessa arranged her newly returned flowers in a jar of water. "When was that?" "Christmas. William hosts a dinner for those without family nearby." He removed his gloves, revealing strong, calloused hands. "Been doing it for years." "That sounds like him," Tessa said fondly. "He's been very kind since I arrived. Must be quite a change from Philadelphia." Tessa poured the coffee into 2 earthenware mugs, "In ways I expected and ways I didn't." She placed one before him, taking the seat across the table. "I thought I'd miss the theaters, the libraries, the shops, and I do sometimes, but there's an honesty here that's refreshing." Vaughn wrapped his hands around the mug, studying her with those remarkable green eyes. "Most Easterners find Montana too rough, too raw." "Perhaps I'm not most Easterners," Tessa replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "My father was a physician. After my mother died when I was 12, he took me with him on his rounds. I've seen poverty and suffering enough to know fine clothes and fancy manners don't necessarily make a person worthwhile." Something in Vaughn's expression shifted, a reassessment. "Your father sounds like a good man." "He was," Tessa said quietly. "He taught me to judge people by their actions, not their circumstances." She sipped her coffee, then asked, "And you, Mr. Ashwood, have you always been in Montana?" "No, madam. Born in Texas. Came north with a cattle drive when I was 16, liked what I saw and stayed." He traced a pattern on the wooden table with his finger. "Been working cattle ranches ever since." "Do you have family?" Not anymore. Lost my folks to cholera when I was young. Had a brother, but he died at Shiloh. I'm sorry, Tessa said, understanding in her voice. The war took so many. It did, Vaughn agreed, then seemed to shake off the melancholy. Your uncle says you're planning to stay in Silver Creek permanently. That's my intention, yes. Tessa hesitated. Though I'll admit I'm still finding my place here. How so? She considered how to explain. In Philadelphia, I had defined roles: a physician's daughter, a lady of modest society. Here I'm uncertain what's expected of me, beyond helping Uncle William. Seems to me the West offers a woman more freedom to define herself, Vaughn observed. Less rigid expectations. Perhaps that's what's so unsettling, Tessa admitted with a small laugh. Too many possibilities. The door opened then, admitting William Ainsley, who removed his leather apron and hung it on a peg. Thought I recognized that horse, he said, nodding to Vaughn. Good to see you, Ashwood. Mr. Ainsley, Vaughn acknowledged, standing to shake the older man's hand. Vaughn returned my basket, Tessa explained. I invited him for coffee. William filled a mug for himself. Decent of you. How are things at the Circle B? Heard Johnson's been expanding his operation. New breeding stock arrived last week, Vaughn confirmed. Planning to improve the herd over the next few years. The men fell into easy conversation about cattle, grazing rights, and the persistent drought affecting the region. Tessa observed Vaughn as he spoke, noting the quiet confidence in his manner, the intelligence behind his comments. He wasn't educated in the formal sense, but he possessed a practical wisdom that commanded respect. When he finally rose to leave, the afternoon was waning. Tessa walked him to the door, aware of her uncle's watchful gaze. Thank you again for returning my basket, she said. Vaughn settled his hat back on his head. My pleasure, Miss Ainsley. He hesitated, then added, Town's having a social on Saturday, dance at the schoolhouse. Might be a good way to meet more folks. Tessa felt a flutter of anticipation. I've heard mention of it. Would you? That is, might you consider attending? His usual self-assurance seemed to falter. I believe Uncle William was planning to go, she replied carefully. Good, Vaughn said, nodding. That's good. Perhaps I'll see you there then. Perhaps you will, Tessa agreed, a small smile playing at her lips. As she watched him ride away, William came to stand beside her. Fine young man, Ashwood, one of the best horsemen in the county, and honest as the day is long. Tessa turned to find her uncle watching her with knowing eyes. Is that so? It is, William affirmed. Lost his family young, made his own way. Folks respect him, he paused. Wouldn't mind seeing more of him around here. Uncle William, Tessa protested, color rising in her cheeks. He was merely being neighborly. William harumphed skeptically. Rode 5 miles out of his way to return a basket he could have dropped off any time this past week. That's more than neighborly in my book. Tessa couldn't quite suppress her smile. We'll see him at the social on Saturday, I expect. Expect we will, William agreed, returning to his forge with a satisfied expression. Alone on the porch, Tessa found herself looking forward to Saturday with unexpected eagerness. The small bundle of prairie flowers sat in their jar on the table inside, a simple reminder of a man who had gone out of his way to return something she had thought lost forever. The town social was Silver Creek's monthly gathering for community celebration and connection. While the mining towns further west had gained reputations for lawlessness and vice, Silver Creek prided itself on being a family settlement. The schoolhouse, transformed with lanterns and bunting, buzzed with activity as Tessa and William arrived on Saturday evening. Tessa had agonized over her appearance more than she cared to admit. Her wardrobe, once extensive in Philadelphia, had been necessarily reduced for the journey west. She finally settled on her best dress, a deep blue silk with modest lace trim at the collar and cuffs. She'd arranged her honey-brown hair in a simple style, secured with her mother's silver combs. "You look lovely," William assured her as they approached the schoolhouse. "Every unmarried man in town will be asking for a dance." "Uncle William," Tessa chided gently, adjusting her shawl against the evening chill. "I didn't come west to find a husband." "No," he agreed, "but that doesn't mean one won't find you." His eyes twinkled. Besides, a few dances never hurt anyone. Inside, the schoolroom had been transformed. Desks pushed aside, a small group of musicians tuned their instruments in the corner, and tables laden with food lined one wall. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the proceedings, and the wooden floor had been swept clean for dancing. Tessa knew perhaps a third of the faces regular customers at the smithy, shopkeepers she'd met on errands, and neighbors who had called to welcome her. William was immediately drawn into conversation with friends, leaving Tessa standing somewhat uncertainly near the entrance. "Miss Ainsley," a familiar voice greeted her. "You came." She turned to find Vaughn Ashwood regarding her with appreciation. He'd clearly made an effort for the occasion, wearing a clean white shirt, dark vest, and what appeared to be new trousers. His dark hair was neatly combed, though a rebellious lock fell across his forehead. "Mr. Ashwood," she returned with a genuine smile. "Yes, Uncle William persuaded me." "Glad he did," Vaughn said simply. He glanced around the room, which was growing crowded. "First social." "In Silver Creek, yes. They're not fancy affairs, but folks enjoy them." He offered his arm. "May I get you some punch?" Tessa placed her hand on his sleeve, noting the firm muscle beneath the fabric. "Thank you, that would be lovely." As they moved through the crowd, Tessa became aware of curious glances. Vaughn seemed oblivious, but she noted the speculative looks, the whispered comments behind hands. Small towns were the same everywhere. She reflected, eager for romance, gossip, and diversion. At the refreshment table, Vaughn handed her a cup of punch that proved surprisingly tart and refreshing. "Mrs. Patterson adds wild berries," he explained. "Best punch in the county." "It's delicious," Tessa agreed, surveying the gathering. "Do you attend these socials often?" "When I can." "Ranch work doesn't always allow for socializing." He hesitated, then added, "But I made a point to be here tonight." Before Tessa could respond to this significant admission, the fiddle struck up a lively tune, and couples began forming sets for a square dance. "Would you care to dance, Miss Ainsley?" Vaughn asked, setting aside his cup and extending his hand. Tessa placed her fingers in his. "I should warn you, I'm only familiar with Eastern dances." Humor lit his eyes. "Nothing to it, just follow along and trust your partner." The dance proved more energetic than any Tessa had experienced in Philadelphia drawing rooms. She found herself being twirled, promenaded, and passed from partner to partner in the intricate patterns, always returning to Vaughn, whose sure guidance kept her from missteps. By the time the music ended, she was breathless and laughing. "You did well for an Easterner," Vaughn teased as they moved from the dance floor. "High praise indeed," Tessa returned, fanning herself with her hand. "Though I fear these Western dances are designed to test one's endurance." "Just getting warmed up," Vaughn assured her with a grin that transformed his usually serious face. "Wait till they play Turkey in the Straw." The evening progressed pleasantly. Tessa danced with several men, met numerous townspeople, and enjoyed the simple but hearty refreshments. Yet she found her attention continually drawn to Vaughn, tracking his movements across the room even when engaged in conversation with others. When he appeared at her side again, offering to escort her outside for some fresh air, she accepted without hesitation. The night air was cool and bracing after the warmth of the schoolhouse. Stars spangled the vast Montana sky, more brilliant than Tessa had ever seen in the east. They walked a little way from the building, the music and laughter muffled by distance. "Beautiful night," Vaughn observed, his deep voice carrying in the stillness. "It is," Tessa agreed, wrapping her shawl more securely around her shoulders. "I've never seen so many stars." "One of the things I love about Montana," Vaughn said, looking upward. "Sky seems bigger here somehow." "Does it ever make you feel small?" Tessa asked. "All that vastness," Vaughn considered her question seriously. "Used to when I first came north, now it feels, right, like there's room to breathe to be who you're meant to be." "Is that why you stayed? After the cattle drive," he nodded slowly. "Partly. Also met some good people who showed me there could be more to life than just surviving." He glanced at her. "What about you? What made you choose Montana after Philadelphia?" Tessa was silent for a moment, organizing her thoughts. "After my father died, there wasn't much left for me. The house went to pay his debts. I could have become a companion to some wealthy widow or perhaps a governess, but—" She trailed off, then continued more firmly. "I wanted something different, something real." Uncle William's letters over the years always painted Montana as a place where people mattered more than possessions or position. "Your uncle was right about that," Vaughn affirmed. "Out here, a person's measured by their word and their work." He paused. "Do you miss it? The East?" "Sometimes," Tessa admitted. "The libraries especially. I've always loved books." "Town's starting a lending library," Vaughn told her. "Small collection but growing. Mrs. Henderson at the general store is organizing it." "Really?" Tessa brightened. "I have books I could contribute." "Uncle William had some of my father's medical texts shipped, along with some novels." "Be good for the town," Vaughn said. "Especially in winter when there's less to do." They had stopped walking, standing now in a pool of shadow beneath a large cottonwood tree. From this distance, the schoolhouse was a glowing beacon, the music faint but discernible. "Miss Ainsley, Tessa," Vaughn began, his voice different somehow. "I've been meaning to say there you are," William's voice called from nearer the schoolhouse. "Tessa, they're serving Mrs. Harkin's apple cake." Vaughn stepped back, the moment broken. "We should go back," he said, offering his arm again. "Mrs. Harkin's cake is legendary." Tessa took his arm, curiosity burning about what he had been about to say. "Of course. We wouldn't want to miss that." The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly enough, but Tessa felt a subtle shift in Vaughn's manner, a slight withdrawal, a return to his more reserved self. When it came time to leave, he escorted her and William to their wagon. "Thank you for the dances, Miss Ainsley," he said formally, helping her onto the seat. "I enjoyed your company." "As did I, Mr. Ashwood," she replied, searching his face in the dim light. "Will we see you in town again soon?" "Hard to say," he answered. "Work keeps me busy at the ranch most days, but I'll be around." It wasn't the answer she'd hoped for. As William clicked to the horses and the wagon pulled away, Tessa found herself looking back, catching a final glimpse of Vaughn standing alone in the moonlight, watching them depart. "Nice evening," William commented as they drove home. "Seemed like you enjoyed yourself." "I did," Tessa agreed, pulling her shawl closer against the night chill. "Everyone was very welcoming. Noticed you spent quite a bit of time with Ashwood." Tessa could hear the question in her uncle's voice. "He was kind enough to introduce me to people," she replied neutrally. William harumphed softly. "Ashwood's not usually one for socializing. Man keeps to himself most times." "Does he?" Tessa asked, trying to sound merely curious. "MMM. Been here going on 6 years now. Hard worker, respected, but doesn't let many folks get close." William glanced sidelong at her. "Interesting to see him taking such an interest in you." "Uncle William," Tessa protested, "you're making too much of simple courtesy." Her uncle's chuckle rumbled in the darkness. "If you say so, my dear. If you say so. But as they traveled the dark road to their cabin, Tessa found herself replaying every moment of her interactions with Vaughn Ashwood, wondering what he had been about to say before they were interrupted, and why he had seemed to withdraw afterward. Despite her protestations to her uncle, she couldn't deny her own growing interest in the quiet cowboy with the remarkable green eyes and steady hands. What she couldn't know was how often Vaughn thought of her in the days that followed, or how her face had come to haunt his dreams. 2 weeks passed with no sign of Vaughn Ashwood in Silver Creek. Tessa told herself she wasn't watching for him, wasn't listening for hoofbeats outside the smithy. She threw herself into establishing a routine, helping William with his accounts, cooking their meals, cleaning their small cabin, and gradually making acquaintances in town. She volunteered to help with the lending library misses. Henderson was organizing, sorting through donated books, and creating a simple catalog system. The work was satisfying, providing her with both reading material and social connections. Several women from town began inviting her to quilting circles and afternoon teas, gently integrating her into the community's fabric. Yet something felt unsettled within her, a restlessness she couldn't quite name. On the 17th day after the social knot that she was counting, Tessa decided to visit the general store for supplies. The September day was pleasantly warm, the trees beginning to show hints of gold and red at their edges. As she approached the store, the sound of raised voices drew her attention to a group of men gathered outside the saloon across the street. Even from a distance, she recognized Sheriff Taylor, his silver star catching the sunlight, and beside him, tall and unmistakable, was Vaughn. Tessa hesitated, not wanting to intrude on what appeared to be an official matter. But as she watched, she realized the conversation was growing heated. 3 men faced the sheriff and Vaughn, rough-looking characters with an air of menace about them. One, a heavy-set man with a bushy beard, jabbed a finger toward Vaughn's chest. "You Ashwood, the one who works for the Circle B," the man demanded loudly enough for his voice to carry across the street. "That's right," Vaughn replied, his posture relaxed but alert. "Then you're the one who reported our cattle brand to the association," the bearded man accused. "Cost us a contract with the Army quartermaster." Sheriff Taylor stepped between them. "That's enough, Blackburn. The brand inspectors made that determination, not Ashwood." "He's the one who raised the question," another man, thin and wiry with a pockmarked face, interjected. "Our brand's been registered since '71. "Registered but altered since," Vaughn replied calmly. "Anyone with eyes can see you've been changing Circle B marks to double bar marks." Tessa drew in a sharp breath, understanding dawning. Cattle rustling was a serious offense in the West, one that had led to hangings and range wars. "You calling us thieves?" the bearded Blackburn growled, hand hovering near his holstered pistol. "I'm saying the evidence speaks for itself," Vaughn answered, not backing down. 12 head with altered brands found on your property last week." The tension in the group was palpable even from across the street. Tessa stood frozen, shopping forgotten, as she watched the confrontation unfold. Sheriff Taylor placed a hand on his own weapon. "This matter's being handled legally, Blackburn. Territory Marshal's been notified. Best thing for you and your boys is to ride out of Silver Creek and be available when summoned for questioning." For a moment, it seemed violence might erupt. The third man, younger than his companions but with cold, dead eyes, had shifted position to flank Vaughn. Tessa found herself moving forward without conscious decision, crossing the street toward the group. "Mr. Ashwood," she called, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I was hoping to see you today." All heads turned toward her. Vaughn's expression flickered from surprise to concern, but he recovered quickly. "Miss Ainsley," he acknowledged, "is there something you need?" Tessa came to stand beside him, deliberately ignoring the tension in the air. "Uncle William mentioned you might know where to find wild berry bushes. I was hoping to gather some before the season ends." Her calm intrusion seemed to deflate the confrontation somewhat. The bearded Blackburn's gaze flicked between her and Vaughn, a new calculation in his eyes. "This isn't finished, Ashwood," he muttered, stepping back. "We'll see who the territory marshal believes." "Evidence doesn't lie, Blackburn," Sheriff Taylor replied. "Now I suggest you boys mount up and ride out. You're not welcome to linger in Silver Creek." With final glares of hatred, the three men stalked toward their horses tied at the hitching post. Vaughn moved subtly, positioning himself between them and Tessa, until they had mounted and ridden away, dust rising from their horses' hooves. Only when they had disappeared from view did the sheriff relax his stance. "Bold move, Miss Ainsley," he commented, tipping his hat to her. "But I'd appreciate it if civilians didn't insert themselves into potential gunfights." "I apologize, Sheriff," Tessa replied, feeling a belated tremor in her hands. "I acted without thinking." "She helped defuse the situation," Vaughn said, a note of approval in his voice despite the concern in his eyes. "But Taylor's right, Tessa. Those men are dangerous." It was the first time he had used her given name without hesitation, and Tessa found she liked the sound of it in his deep voice. Sheriff Taylor nodded. "Blackburn and his crew have been suspected of rustling for months. Finally caught them red-handed thanks to Ashwood here noticing the altered brands." He shook his head. "They won't forget it, though." "Will there be trouble?" Tessa asked. "Not in town," the sheriff assured her, "but I'd watch my back on the trail for a while, Ashwood." "Always do," Vaughn replied grimly. He turned to Tessa as the sheriff departed. "You shouldn't have done that. Those men wouldn't hesitate to hurt a woman." "I didn't think," Tessa admitted. I couldn't stand by and watch." Vaughn's expression softened. "It was brave, foolish, but brave." He glanced down the street where the men had disappeared. "But Blackburn holds grudges. Best if you're not seen as associated with me for a while." Tessa lifted her chin. "I choose my own associations, Mr. Ashwood. I'm not afraid of men like that." "Maybe you should be," Vaughn said quietly. "There are harsh realities in this territory that Philadelphia didn't prepare you for." "Don't condescend to me," Tessa replied, a spark of anger flaring. "I may be from the East, but I'm not naive. My father treated gunshot wounds, knife wounds, victims of violence. I assisted him. I've seen what people can do to one another." Vaughn studied her face, something like admiration dawning in his eyes. "I stand corrected, Miss Ainsley." After a moment, he added, "Were you really looking for berry bushes?" The abrupt change of subject made her smile despite herself. "No." That was the first excuse that came to mind, though I wouldn't mind learning where they grow for future reference. "I could show you," he offered, then hesitated. "Though perhaps not today. I need to get back to the ranch and inform Johnson about this encounter." Disappointment coursed through Tessa, though she understood the necessity. "Of course. Another time, perhaps." Vaughn cleared his throat. "The Harvest Festival is next month, October 12th. Bigger than the regular socials. People come from all the surrounding ranches and settlements." "Will you attend?" Tessa asked directly. "I will." His eyes held hers. "Would you? That is, might I escort you? You and your uncle, of course." Tessa felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I would like that very much, Mr. Ashwood." "Vaughn," he corrected gently. "If we're to be friends, you should call me Vaughn." "Vaughn," she repeated, smiling. "And you must call me Tessa as you did earlier." He nodded, a smile transforming his features. "Tessa, then." He glanced toward the sun's position. "I should go. Johnson will be waiting for a report." "Of course." Tessa stepped back. "Until the festival, then." "Until then." He touched the brim of his hat in salute, then strode toward where his horse was hitched outside the sheriff's office. Tessa watched him go, the memory of those hostile men tempering her happiness. She hadn't exaggerated to Vaughn, she did understand danger. But understanding it and facing it were different matters. For the first time since arriving in Montana, she felt a flicker of the fear that had been so foreign to her confident nature. Not fear for herself, but for the man whose quiet strength and integrity were increasingly drawing her admiration, and perhaps something deeper. October brought cooler days and brilliant foliage to Silver Creek. Tessa found herself watching the calendar, counting down to the Harvest Festival with an anticipation that both amused and alarmed her. Since the confrontation with Blackburn and his men, Vaughn had made 2 brief visits to town, stopping by the smithy each time to exchange a few words with her and William. The visits were too short, too formal, but they sustained her through the waiting. William observed her growing attachment with knowing eyes, but made no comment beyond assuring her that Vaughn Ashwood was a man of character. 3 days before the festival, a letter arrived from the Circle B ranch, delivered by a young ranch hand. Written in a careful, precise hand, it informed Tessa that Vaughn had been called away on ranch business to Helena and would not return in time for the festival. He expressed his regret and hoped she would attend anyway, promising to call upon her when he returned. Disappointment settled over Tessa like a heavy blanket. She considered not attending at all, but William insisted. "The whole town turns out," he reminded her. "Would look strange if you didn't go, especially after you've been helping with the preparations." Reluctantly, Tessa agreed. The day of the festival dawned clear and crisp, perfect autumn weather for the outdoor celebration. The town square had been transformed with decorations, corn stalks, pumpkins, colorful leaves arranged in festive displays. Tables groaned under the weight of food, and a platform had been erected for dancing. Tessa wore her burgundy dress, a color that complemented her honey-brown hair and fair complexion. She had spent extra time on her appearance, pinning her hair in an elegant style and adding her mother's pearl earrings. William escorted her proudly, greeting friends and neighbors as they made their way through the crowded square. "Tessa, you look wonderful, Mrs. Henderson called, waving her over to where several women were arranging the dessert table. "We need your help judging the pie contest." The afternoon passed pleasantly enough. Tessa sampled pies, joined in games, and even danced with several of the local men, including the shy schoolteacher who had recently arrived from Minnesota. Yet she found her gaze constantly drawn to the edges of the gathering, searching for a tall figure who would not appear. As twilight approached, lanterns were lit around the square, casting a golden glow over the festivities. Musicians struck up a lively tune, and couples formed sets for dancing. William had long since joined a card game with his friends, leaving Tessa free to wander among the revelers. She was standing near the edge of the gathering, watching the dancers, when a deep voice spoke from behind her. "You look like you're waiting for someone." Tessa whirled, heart leaping, to find Vaughn standing there, travel-worn but unmistakably present. His clothes showed signs of hard riding, and a fine layer of dust covered his boots, but his green eyes were bright as they took in her appearance. "Vaughn," she exclaimed, unable to contain her surprise and delight. "Your letter said you wouldn't be back in time." "Finished my business faster than expected," he explained, a smile warming his features. "Rode hard to get here before the dancing ended." "I'm glad you did," Tessa admitted, suddenly shy. "It's good to see you." Vaughn's gaze traveled over her burgundy dress, appreciation evident. "You look beautiful, Tessa." A flush of pleasure warmed her cheeks. "Thank you, you look dusty," he supplied with a self-deprecating smile, Didn't take time to clean up. Didn't want to miss any more of the evening than I already had. The admission touched her deeply. I'm honored you made such an effort. Worth every mile, Vaughn said simply. He offered his hand. Would you dance with me? I know I'm not presentable for polite company, but I would love to, Tessa interrupted, placing her hand in his without hesitation. He led her to the dance area just as the musicians began a waltz. Unlike the square dances that had dominated the evening, this was a dance Tessa knew well from Philadelphia ballrooms. Vaughn placed one hand at her waist, the other holding hers, maintaining a proper distance between them. I should warn you, he said as they began to move. Waltzes aren't common in cowboy country. I may not do this justice. But his movements belied his modesty. Vaughn guided her smoothly across the wooden platform, his steps sure and rhythmic. Tessa followed his lead effortlessly, feeling as though they had danced together countless times before. Where did you learn to waltz? She asked, curiosity overcoming her. A shadow crossed his face. My mother taught me long ago. She grew up in New Orleans, educated in a fine school for young ladies, married my father against her family's wishes and moved to Texas. His voice softened with memory. She said every gentleman should know how to waltz, no matter where life took him. She was right, Tessa said gently. And a good teacher. She was, Vaughn agreed, his expression clearing, though I haven't had much occasion to use the skill. Until tonight, Tessa murmured. Until tonight, he echoed, his hand tightening slightly at her waist. They danced in silence for several moments, the music wrapping around them, isolating them in their own private world despite the crowd. Tessa was acutely aware of his proximity, the strength in his hand at her waist, the clean scent of open air that clung to him beneath the dust of the trail. I've thought about you, Vaughn said suddenly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Every day since the social, more than is probably wise. Tessa's heart quickened at his confession. I've thought of you too, she admitted, meeting his gaze directly. More than is probably proper. The corner of his mouth lifted. Propriety seems less important out here than back east. One of the things I'm coming to appreciate about Montana, Tessa replied with a small smile. The music ended too soon. They stood for a moment, still in the dance position, reluctant to break the connection. Around them, other couples were dispersing, moving toward the refreshment tables or preparing for the next dance. Would you walk with me? Vaughn asked, finally releasing her waist but keeping hold of her hand. I'd like to talk with you away from the crowd. Tessa nodded, allowing him to lead her away from the platform, past the bustling activity of the festival, toward a quieter area near the church. Lantern light barely reached here, the shadows deeper, the sounds of celebration muted. Vaughn stopped beneath a large oak tree, its leaves a riot of red and gold in the daylight, now just a darker silhouette against the night sky. He turned to face her, still holding her hand. I didn't just come back for the festival, he said without preamble. I came back for you. The directness of his statement took Tessa's breath away. In Philadelphia, courtship was a carefully choreographed dance of hints and subtle implications. This forthright declaration was as bracing as Montana's mountain air. I'm glad, she replied simply, honestly. I need you to understand something, Vaughn continued, his expression serious. I'm not a wealthy man. I've saved some money, bought a small piece of land south of Johnson's property, planning to start my own ranch eventually. But it's a hard life, especially for a woman used to Eastern comforts. Tessa understood what he was saying and what he wasn't saying. Vaughn, do you think I care about wealth, about comforts? I think you deserve them, he answered. Deserve better than a rough cabin and endless work. What I deserve, Tessa said firmly, is to make my own choices. To decide what matters to me. She stepped closer to him. My father's practice in Philadelphia was in a poor district. We never had wealth, but we had purpose. That's what I value." Vaughn's expression was unreadable in the dim light. "What are you saying, Tessa?" "I'm saying that I've met many men in my life, wealthy men, educated men, men with impeccable social standing. None of them affected me the way you do." She gathered her courage. "I'm saying that I care for you, Vaughn Ashwood. More than I probably should, given how little time we've known each other." He released her hand then, only to raise his own to her face, gently tracing the line of her cheek with calloused fingers. "Time measures differently out here," he said softly. "A season can change a landscape completely. 3 months of drought can destroy a ranch. A single moment can save a life." His eyes held hers. "Or change it forever." Tessa leaned slightly into his touch, her heart thundering in her chest. "The day you saved me from that stampede. I've been caught in a different kind of stampede ever since," Vaughn confessed, a smile touching his lips. "A stampede right through the center of my heart." Before she could respond, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, Tessa rose on her tiptoes, returning the kiss with a certainty that surprised even herself. When they finally parted, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have the right to ask anything of you yet," he murmured. "Need to establish myself first, prove I can provide." "Vaughn," Tessa began to protest, but he placed a finger gently on her lips. "Let me do this properly," he insisted. "Your uncle deserves that respect, and so do you." Tessa nodded slowly, understanding his need to honor tradition despite the unconventional nature of their courtship. "I'll speak with your uncle," Vaughn promised. "Ask his permission to court you formally. But first, I need to settle some matters at the ranch, make arrangements for my future." "How long?" Tessa asked, unable to keep a note of disappointment from her voice. "A month, maybe 2, Vaughn replied. "Johnson's offered to buy my contract out early if I help bring in the fall herd. Then I can focus on building my own place." 2 months is a long time, Tessa sighed. Vaughn smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "For a Philadelphia lady, perhaps. For a Montana woman, it's barely the blink of an eye. I'm trying to become the latter," she reminded him with a small smile. "You're well on your way," he assured her. "The whole town has noticed." A call from the direction of the festival drew their attention. The final dance was being announced, and lanterns were being extinguished as the celebration wound down. "We should get back," Tessa said reluctantly. "Uncle William will be looking for me." Vaughn offered his arm, which she took gladly. As they walked back toward the lights and music, he said, "I'll leave for the ranch tomorrow, but I'll be thinking of you every day until I return." "And I'll be waiting," Tessa promised, "learning to be a proper Montana woman while you're gone." His low chuckle warmed her. "You're already more than proper enough for me, Tessa Ainsley." They rejoined the festival for the final dance, a lively reel that left them breathless and laughing. When it came time to part, Vaughn kissed her hand in full view of the townsfolk, an unmistakable declaration of his intentions. The gesture would spark gossip, but Tessa found she didn't mind. Let Silver Creek talk. For the first time since arriving in Montana, she felt truly at home, not because of the place, but because of the man who had stampeded into her heart. True to his word, Vaughn departed the next day. October stretched into November, and still no word came from the Circle B. Tessa kept busy, helping with the lending library, assisting her uncle in the smithy, and preparing for her first Montana winter. The first snowfall came early, blanketing Silver Creek in white and transforming the landscape into something magical and forbidding all at once. William assured her that Vaughn's silence was normal, for the seasoned ranchers were busy with final preparations before winter set in fully, often working from dawn until well after dusk to ensure animals and buildings were ready for the harsh weather ahead. "He'll come when he can," her uncle told her, watching her gaze drift to the window for the 100th time that day. "Man gave his word, and Ashwood's word is solid as Montana bedrock." Tessa nodded, trying to quell her growing concern. It wasn't just the lack of communication that troubled her. Rumors had reached Silver Creek that the Blackburn gang had been raiding isolated homesteads north of town. The territorial marshal had arrived to investigate the rustling charges, but had found little evidence the altered brands had mysteriously disappeared from the confiscated cattle, and witnesses had suddenly developed poor memories. The marshal had departed with promises to return, but everyone knew the territory was too vast and lawmen too few for effective enforcement. Justice in Montana often fell to local communities to handle, for better or worse. Late one afternoon in mid-November, Tessa was alone in the cabin, kneading dough for tomorrow's bread, when a knock sounded at the door. Her heart leapt, but she tempered her expectations. Visitors were common at the smithy, usually customers seeking William's services. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door to find a young boy, perhaps 12 years old, standing on the porch with a battered envelope in his hands. "Miss Ainsley," he asked, teeth chattering in the cold. "Got a letter for you. Man gave me 2 bits to deliver it right away." Tessa accepted the envelope, noting it bore no address, just her name written in a bold, somewhat hurried hand. "Thank you," she said, reaching into her pocket for a coin. "You must be freezing. Would you like to come in for some hot cider before you go?" The boy shook his head, already backing away. "No, madam. Got to get home before dark. Ma worries." He pocketed the coin she offered and darted away, disappearing down the snowy street. Tessa closed the door and examined the envelope. It was slightly damp at the edges, as if carried through snow. With fingers that suddenly trembled, she broke the plain wax seal and withdrew a single sheet of paper. "Tessa, trouble at the ranch. Blackburn and his men have threatened Johnson and his family. I'm staying on to help protect them. Not safe for me to come to town. Blackburn's men watching the roads. When this is resolved, I'll come to you. If you don't hear from me by Christmas, speak to Sheriff Taylor. He knows where my property deed is kept. Yours always, Vaughn." Tessa read the note 3 times, her concern deepening with each reading. The terse message told her much, not just about the situation at the Circle B, but about Vaughn himself. He was a man who stood by his commitments, who wouldn't abandon his employer in the face of danger, even when it meant delaying his own plans. But the mention of the property deed troubled her deeply. It suggested Vaughn considered the possibility he might not return at all. William's reaction when he read the note that evening confirmed her fears. "This is bad business," he muttered, running a hand through his graying beard. "Johnson's got a wife and 3 young daughters at that ranch. If Blackburn's threatening them, can't the sheriff do something?" Tessa asked, pacing the small cabin. "Form a posse. Taylor's got no jurisdiction outside town limits," William explained. "And even if he did, Blackburn's smart. Won't do anything openly illegal where witnesses can see, just threats, intimidation." He sighed heavily. "It's how men like him operate." "So we do nothing?" Tessa demanded, frustration building. "Wait for Christmas and hope Vaughn returns." William regarded her with sympathetic eyes. "Vaughn Ashwood can handle himself, girl. Best thing we can do is stay clear and let him do what needs doing." But as November deepened into December, with no further word from the Circle B ranch, Tessa found waiting increasingly unbearable. The temperature dropped further, snow piled in drifts against buildings, and Silver Creek settled into its winter routine of smaller gatherings, indoor activities, and early nights. 2 weeks before Christmas, Tessa made a decision. After William had gone to bed, she sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter by lamplight. Vaughn, your note reached me safely last month. I understand your commitment to the Johnsons and admire your loyalty. Silver Creek has heard rumors of trouble with the Blackburn gang. Sheriff Taylor says the territorial marshal may return after the new year, but that seems a long time to wait if the situation is as serious as your note suggested. Please send word of your safety if possible. If I don't hear from you by December 20th, I will assume the situation has worsened. In that case, know that I am not a woman who simply waits for rescue or resolution. My father raised me to act when action is needed. Be careful, but know you are not alone in this. Yours. Tessa. The following morning, Tessa hired the same delivery boy to take her letter to the Circle B ranch, providing him with detailed instructions and enough money to ensure his discretion. The boy, eager for the adventure and the generous payment, promised to deliver it directly to Vaughn Ashwood and no one else. 3 days passed with no response. Then 4, then 5. On the 6th day, a heavy snowstorm isolated Silver Creek completely, making travel impossible. By December 19th, with no word from Vaughn and her self-imposed deadline looming, Tessa approached her uncle as he worked in the forge. I need to speak with you, she said, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. William set aside his hammer, wiping sweat from his brow. Sounds serious. It is. Tessa took a deep breath. I want to go to the Circle B ranch. Her uncle's bushy eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. Out of the question. Roads are barely passable, and with Blackburn's men causing trouble, that's precisely why I need to go, Tessa interrupted. It's been over a month since Vaughn's note. Something is wrong, Uncle William. I can feel it. William studied her face, seeming to recognize the determination there. What exactly do you think you can do that Vaughn and Johnson can't? I don't know, Tessa admitted. But I can't just sit here waiting. Not anymore. She squared her shoulders. Father always said sometimes just showing up where you're not expected can change a situation, create an opportunity. Or create danger, William countered. Blackburn's not the type to be gentle with a woman who gets in his way. I'm not planning to confront him, Tessa assured her uncle. I just want to see for myself what's happening. Perhaps bring supplies, medicine, food, legitimate reasons for a visit. William paced the length of the forge, clearly conflicted. Finally, he turned to her with a sigh. You're as stubborn as your mother was. She'd have done the same, I reckon. He pointed a finger at her. But you're not going alone. I'm coming with you. Relief flooded through Tessa. Thank you, Uncle William. Don't thank me yet, he grumbled. If we get shot at or caught in another blizzard, you might not be so grateful. They spent the next day preparing for the journey. William borrowed a sturdy sleigh from a friend, reasoning it would navigate the snow-covered roads better than a wagon. They packed supplies, food, medicines, extra blankets, and Tessa noted with a mixture of concern and approval, William's shotgun. December 21st dawned clear and bitterly cold. Dressed in her warmest clothes with a woolen scarf wrapped around her head and face, Tessa climbed into the sleigh beside her uncle. The horses, fitted with special shoes for better traction in the snow, snorted plumes of steam into the frigid air. Last chance to change your mind, William offered as he took up the reins. Tessa shook her head. Let's go. The journey to the Circle B ranch normally took about 3 hours by wagon. In the snow, with frequent stops to clear fallen branches or navigate drifted sections of road, it took them nearly 6. The sun was low on the horizon when they finally crested a rise and saw the ranch buildings in the valley below. Even from a distance, Tessa could tell something was wrong. The corrals that should have held cattle stood empty. No smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, despite the bitter cold. No movement could be seen in the yard or the surrounding buildings. "Something's not right," William muttered, echoing her thoughts. He reached for the shotgun, laying it across his lap as he guided the horses forward more cautiously. As they approached the ranch house, the door opened and a figure emerged. For a heart-stopping moment, Tessa thought it might be Vaughn. But the man who stepped onto the porch was older, his beard streaked with gray, his posture weary. "That's Johnson," William confirmed as they drew closer. "Looks like he's aged 10 years since I last saw him." Johnson watched their approach with a guarded expression that only eased slightly when he recognized William. He descended the porch steps, one hand resting near a holstered pistol. "Ainsley," he called as they halted the sleigh in the yard. "What brings you out in this weather?" William climbed down from the sleigh, helping Tessa down after him. "Came to check on things, heard there might be trouble." Johnson's gaze shifted to Tessa, recognition dawning. "You're the lady from town, the one Ashwood." He trailed off, glancing nervously toward the outbuildings. "Yes," Tessa confirmed, stepping forward. "I'm Tessa Ainsley. We're concerned about Vaughn. He sent a note last month saying there was trouble with Blackburn's gang." A shadow passed over Johnson's face. "You'd better come inside," he said after a moment's hesitation. "Not safe to talk out here." The interior of the ranch house was cold, the fire in the hearth reduced to embers. A woman who must be Mrs. Johnson sat at the table, darning socks with trembling hands. 3 girls of varying ages huddled together on a settee, their faces pinched with cold and fear. None of them had the well-fed, content look Tessa would have expected on a prosperous ranch. "My wife and daughters," Johnson introduced briefly. "Martha, stoke that fire up. We have guests." Mrs. Johnson moved to obey, avoiding eye contact. Tessa immediately went to help her, adding wood to the dying embers and encouraging them back to life. "We've brought supplies," she told the woman quietly. "Food, some medicines." Gratitude flooded the woman's tired face. "Bless you," she whispered. "The children haven't had proper bread in weeks." While Tessa helped Mrs. Johnson unpack the provisions, William spoke with Johnson in low tones. Tessa caught fragments, cattle gone, threatened to burn the place. No way to get word out. Finally, she could contain her questions no longer. "Mr. Johnson," she interrupted, "where is Vaughn?" The room fell silent. Johnson and his wife exchanged a look heavy with meaning. "Ashwood's been gone 4 days now," Johnson finally said. "Blackburn's men caught him trying to drive some of our cattle to safety, beat him pretty badly. He got away, but—" He spread his hands helplessly. "You don't know where he is?" William demanded, anger rising in his voice. "He said he was going for help," Johnson explained. "Said he had a plan to catch Blackburn with evidence the marshal couldn't ignore, made us promise to stay put, keep the girls safe. And you let him go alone." William's voice rose. "After they'd beaten him." "William," Tessa laid a restraining hand on her uncle's arm. "Mr. Johnson was protecting his family." She turned to the rancher. "Do you know where he might have gone?" "Where Blackburn's men are based," Johnson hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Blackburn's been using an abandoned mining claim about 5 miles north of here. Old cabin, couple of outbuildings. Been driving our stolen cattle up there, changing the brands, then moving them out toward Idaho territory. And you think that's where Vaughn went, to gather evidence?" Tessa pressed. "That'd be my guess," Johnson confirmed. "He was in a bad way but determined, said something about ending this before Christmas." He looked down at his hands. "Haven't seen Blackburn or his men in 3 days, been praying that's a good sign." Tessa and William exchanged glances. "We need to find Vaughn," she said with quiet certainty. "It'll be dark soon," William pointed out, "and we don't know the country north of here." "I can guide you," Johnson offered unexpectedly. "Least I can do after Ashwood stood by us. Martha and the girls will be safe enough here for a few hours." Mrs. Johnson looked frightened but nodded her agreement. "Go, find him. We'll bar the doors." As they prepared to leave, Tessa pulled William aside. "I'm coming with you," she stated firmly. "Absolutely not," he replied, his expression brooking no argument. "Too dangerous." "I didn't come all this way to sit by the fire while you search for Vaughn," Tessa insisted. "I have medical knowledge if he's injured." William stared at her for a long moment, then sighed in defeat. "You stay in the sleigh unless we find him. No heroics, no confrontations. Promise me." "I promise," Tessa agreed, relief flooding through her. She hurried to gather medical supplies from their provisions: clean bandages, her father's small surgical kit, alcohol for disinfection. The sun was setting as they departed, casting long blue shadows across the snow. Johnson rode ahead on horseback, leading them north along a trail that would have been invisible to Tessa's untrained eyes. William handled the sleigh with expert precision, navigating through drifts and around fallen trees. Darkness fell completely before they had traveled 3 miles. Johnson lit a lantern, shielding it partially to provide just enough light to follow without announcing their presence too broadly. The temperature dropped further, the cold seeping through Tessa's layers of clothing despite the warm bricks at her feet. "There," Johnson suddenly hissed, pointing toward a distant glow among the trees. "That's Blackburn's place." They halted the sleigh in a copse of pines, concealing it as best they could. William helped Tessa down, repeating his admonition to stay hidden. "We'll scout the situation first," he whispered. "See if there's any sign of Vaughn." Tessa nodded, huddling in her coat as the men crept forward through the trees. The minutes stretched endlessly. The only sounds were the occasional snort from the horses and the distant hooting of an owl. A twig snapped behind her. Tessa whirled, heart in her throat, to find herself staring at the barrel of a pistol. "Don't scream," a low voice warned. "And don't move." The speaker stepped forward into the faint light reflected off the snow. It was the young man from Blackburn's gang, the one with the cold, dead eyes. Blood stained one side of his coat and his face was twisted with pain and anger. "You're one of Blackburn's men," Tessa said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You're injured." "Shut up," he growled, gesturing with the pistol. "Where are the others, the blacksmith and Johnson?" "Gone to town for the marshal," Tessa lied, hoping to discourage him from searching. "They'll be back with help by morning." The young man's face contorted. "You're lying. Saw your tracks in the snow heading right for Blackburn's camp." He grabbed her arm roughly. "You're coming with me." "Need a hostage." "You're bleeding badly," Tessa observed, noting how he swayed on his feet. "You need medical attention, not a hostage." "Said shut up," he snarled, yanking her toward the trees opposite the direction William and Johnson had gone. Tessa went willingly, mind racing. The man was seriously injured, possibly dying from the amount of blood soaking his coat. She might be able to use that to her advantage. As they stumbled through the snow, she deliberately slowed her pace, forcing him to expend more energy. "Move faster," he ordered, voice weakening. "Where are we going?" Tessa asked, ignoring his command. "Where's Blackburn?" "Dead," the young man replied flatly. "Him and Pock face both. Your cowboy friend saw to that." Hope and dread warred in Tessa's chest. "Vaughn, he killed them." "Not before Blackburn put a bullet in him," the man said with cruel satisfaction. "Left him bleeding in the cabin. Figured he'd die slow alone." He coughed, a wet sound that spoke of internal injury. "Need to get to the horses. Get out of the territory before the marshal comes." They had reached a small clearing where 3 horses stood tethered to a fallen log. The young outlaw's strength was clearly failing. He leaned heavily against a tree, the pistol wavering in his grip. "You're not going anywhere in your condition," Tessa said firmly, her medical training taking over. "That wound needs attention immediately." "Don't need your help," he slurred, but the pistol was dipping lower now, his focus fading. Tessa saw her opportunity. With a sudden lunge, she knocked the weapon from his weakened grasp, sending it spinning into the deep snow. The outlaw made a feeble grab for her, but collapsed to his knees, coughing up bright blood that spattered crimson across the white ground. "Damn you," he gasped, toppling sideways into the snow. Tessa knelt beside him, professional instinct overriding fear. A quick examination confirmed her suspicion he'd been shot in the chest, the bullet likely puncturing a lung. Without immediate surgery in a proper hospital, he wouldn't survive the night. "I can make you more comfortable," she offered, pulling off her scarf to use as a pillow beneath his head. "But I can't save you, I'm sorry." The young man stared up at her with fading eyes. "Cabin," he wheezed. "Your cowboy, still there, might be alive." Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. "Too late for me, always was." Tessa squeezed his hand once, then stood. The outlaw's breathing was already growing more labored. He wouldn't last long in the bitter cold. But there was nothing more she could do for him. Vaughn, however, might still have a chance if she could find him in time. She hesitated only a moment before untying one of the horses, a sturdy bay that stood quietly as she awkwardly mounted. Her riding skills were rudimentary at best, but desperation lent her determination. Orienting herself by the distant glow of light that marked Blackburn's camp, she urged the horse forward. The ride seemed both endless and alarmingly brief. Before she was fully prepared, Tessa found herself approaching a small cabin with light spilling from its windows. She dismounted awkwardly, tethering the horse to a post, and crept toward the structure. Through a frost-rimmed window, she could see the interior, a single room with a rough table, chairs overturned, and signs of a violent struggle. A body lay near the hearth, face down, unmoving. Another was slumped in a corner, clearly dead from the unnatural angle of the neck. And on a narrow cot against the far wall, a third figure lay still tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakable even in the poor light. Tessa's heart nearly stopped. She hurried to the door, finding it partially open. The warmth inside was a shock after the freezing night, but she barely noticed as she rushed to the cot. "Vaughn," she whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. "Vaughn, can you hear me?" His face was badly bruised, one eye swollen shut, dried blood crusting at his hairline and the corner of his mouth. But at the sound of her voice, his good eye flickered open, focusing on her face with obvious disbelief. "Tessa," he rasped, voice barely audible. "Am I dreaming?" "No," she assured him, tears of relief threatening to spill. "I'm here. We came looking for you, Uncle William, Mr. Johnson, and me." Vaughn tried to sit up, wincing sharply. "Blackburn dead," Tessa confirmed, gently pressing him back down. "His men too, except one, and he won't last the night." She began examining him carefully, cataloging his injuries with professional detachment despite her emotional turmoil. "Where are you hurt worst?" sighed, Vaughn admitted, lifting a hand to indicate his left ribs. "Blackburn shot me. Bullet went through, I think." Tessa carefully unbuttoned his shirt, revealing a crudely bandaged wound that had soaked through with blood. "You did this yourself," he nodded weakly. "After, had to stop them, stealing more cattle, Johnson's girls." He trailed off, exhaustion evident. "Don't try to talk," Tessa advised, reaching for water from a nearby bucket to clean the wound. "Save your strength. I need to dress this properly before we move you." "How did you find me?" Vaughn asked, ignoring her instruction. Tessa worked as she spoke, cleaning the wound with gentle efficiency. I couldn't wait any longer without knowing if you were safe. Uncle William and I came to the Circle B today. Johnson told us what happened, that you'd gone after Blackburn alone. Vaughn's good eye held hers. Shouldn't have come. Dangerous. Clearly, Tessa agreed dryly, indicating the bodies of Blackburn and his companion. Though it seems you handled the danger quite effectively. A ghost of a smile touched Vaughn's lips. Not according to plan, was just going to gather evidence. Then Blackburn caught me watching them rebrand Johnson's cattle. He winced as Tessa applied alcohol to the wound. Said they were going to burn out Johnson's family on Christmas Eve, make an example. Couldn't let that happen. So you confronted them alone, Tessa concluded, binding the wound with clean bandages. 3 against 1. Not the smartest decision, Vaughn admitted, but it worked out. Barely, Tessa chided, moving to examine the head wound next. You could have been killed. Worth the risk, Vaughn murmured, his gaze steady on her face despite his pain. Had something to live for, someone to come back to. Tessa's hands stilled in their work. Vaughn Ashwood, if you ever do something this reckless again, you'll what? He challenged, the ghost smile returning. I'll be extremely displeased, she finished, unable to maintain her stern expression. Before Vaughn could respond, the door burst open. William and Johnson stood there, weapons raised, expressions transforming from grim determination to relief as they took in the scene. Thank God, William exclaimed, hurrying to Tessa's side. When we came back and found you gone, he broke off, glaring at her. You promised to stay put. Circumstances changed, Tessa replied calmly, continuing her ministrations. Vaughn's been shot, but the bullet passed through cleanly. He needs proper care, but I believe he'll recover fully. Johnson moved to examine the bodies of Blackburn and his man. Good riddance, he muttered. What about Jed, the young one? Dying in the clearing about a quarter-mile east, Tessa informed him. Chest wound, punctured lung. Nothing to be done. The men exchanged glances at her clinical assessment, a new respect dawning in their expressions. We need to get Vaughn somewhere warm and clean, Tessa continued, all business now. The sleigh would be best. We can make him comfortable with blankets for the journey. William nodded. Johnson and I will bring it here. Can he be moved? Tessa looked to Vaughn, who gave a slight nod. Carefully, she stipulated. The wound could reopen with too much movement. The men departed, leaving Tessa alone with Vaughn once more. She busied herself gathering his belongings, finding his gun belt, hat, and saddlebags stashed in a corner. You're a remarkable woman, Tessa Ainsley, Vaughn said softly, watching her move around the cabin. Riding out here alone, confronting an armed man, treating gunshot wounds like a seasoned physician. My father's daughter, Tessa replied with a small smile. He always said crisis reveals character. She paused, meeting his gaze. Yours has been thoroughly revealed, Vaughn Ashwood. Loyal, brave, perhaps excessively self-sacrificing. And yours has been revealed as stubborn, resourceful, and uncommonly brave, he countered. Qualities a man could admire in a wife. The word hung in the air between them, significant and unmistakable in its intent. Are you proposing, Mr. Ashwood? Tessa asked, her voice steady despite the sudden racing of her heart. While lying wounded in an outlaw's cabin surrounded by dead men. Not officially, Vaughn clarified. That will come later with a ring and on one knee as is proper. This is more. Advance warning. Tessa laughed softly, the sound incongruous in the grim setting but somehow perfect. Consider me warned then. The journey back to the Circle B ranch was slow and careful. Tessa rode in the sleigh beside Vaughn, monitoring his condition vigilantly. Johnson followed on horseback, leading Tessa's borrowed mount and keeping watch for any sign of danger. By the time they reached the ranch, dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Mrs. Johnson and her daughters rushed out to meet them, relief evident as Johnson explained the night's events. The girls hugged their father tearfully, while Mrs. Johnson immediately set about preparing the spare bedroom for Vaughn. "You'll stay until he's recovered," she insisted when Tessa mentioned returning to Silver Creek. "It's the least we can do after all he's done for us." And so began Tessa's tenure as nurse at the Circle B Ranch. William returned to Silver Creek to inform the sheriff of Blackburn's demise and to retrieve more of Tessa's belongings. The sheriff organized a party to recover the bodies and gather evidence for the territorial authorities, officially closing the case of the Blackburn gang. Vaughn proved to be a difficult patient at first, chafing at the restrictions Tessa imposed on his movement. But as the days passed and his strength gradually returned, he settled into allowing her to care for him with increasing grace. Christmas arrived with a fresh snowfall and a simple but joyous celebration. Johnson had ridden to the nearest trading post, returning with small gifts for everyone: candy for his daughters, fabric for his wife, tobacco for William, a book of poetry for Tessa, and a fine new hat for Vaughn. After the modest feast and exchange of gifts, when the girls had been sent to bed and the adults sat around the fire with cups of hot cider, Vaughn cleared his throat. "Johnson," he began, "I've been meaning to discuss the future." The rancher nodded. "Figured as much." "You're welcome to stay on, Ashwood. After what you did, there's always a place for you here." "Appreciate that," Vaughn replied, "but I have other plans." His gaze drifted to Tessa. "Been saving for years to start my own place. Got 100 acres south of here, good water rights, decent grazing." Johnson smiled knowingly. "Going to need more than land to make a home, I reckon." "That's my thinking," Vaughn agreed. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small leather pouch. "Which brings me to something important." Tessa felt her heartbeat quicken as Vaughn rose from his chair, still moving carefully but with growing strength, and came to stand before her. To her astonishment, he lowered himself to one knee. "Tessa Ainsley," he said, his deep voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I promised you I'd do this properly, and I'm a man who keeps his promises." From the pouch, he withdrew a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the firelight in flashes of brilliance. "I'm not a wealthy man," Vaughn continued, "and the life I'm offering won't be easy. But I love you with everything I am, and I promise to spend every day making you glad you chose me. Will you marry me?" Tessa was aware of the others watching William with gruff approval, the Johnsons with evident delight, but in that moment, only Vaughn existed for her. This man who had saved her life, who had risked everything to protect others, who had stampeded through the barriers around her heart with his quiet strength and unwavering integrity. "Yes," she answered, voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will marry you, Vaughn Ashwood." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and rose to his feet, drawing her up with him. Their kiss was gentle but filled with promise, a pledge of the life they would build together. William cleared his throat loudly. "Well, that's settled then," he declared, raising his cup in a toast. "To Vaughn and Tessa, may your life together be long and blessed." "To Vaughn and Tessa," the Johnsons echoed, raising their cups as well. Later, standing on the porch in the crisp night air, Vaughn wrapped his arm around Tessa's shoulders as they gazed at the star-filled sky. "Not exactly how I planned this," he admitted. "Wanted everything to be perfect." "It was perfect," Tessa assured him, leaning into his embrace. "For us." "Still need to build the house," Vaughn reminded her. "Won't be ready until spring at earliest." "I'm in no hurry," Tessa replied. "We have time." Vaughn turned to face her, framing her face with gentle hands. "Never thought I'd find someone like you," he said softly. "Especially not someone who'd want a life out here with all its hardships." "I didn't come west looking for love," Tessa confessed. "But I'm very glad I found it." She smiled up at him. "You saved me from a stampede that day, Vaughn Ashwood, never knowing you'd start one in my heart that hasn't stopped since." His answering smile was tender as he bent to kiss her once more beneath the vast Montana sky, the promise of their future stretching before them like the endless prairie, wild, challenging, and beautiful beyond measure. Spring arrived in Montana with a rush of greenery and wildflowers that transformed the landscape. The wedding of Vaughn Ashwood and Tessa Ainsley became the social event of the season in Silver Creek, with the entire town turning out to celebrate. Tessa wore a simple white dress ordered from Helena, carrying a bouquet of the same prairie wildflowers Vaughn had once returned to her. William gave the bride away with tears in his eyes, though he gruffly denied them afterward. Johnson and his family attended as honored guests, the rancher standing as Vaughn's best man in recognition of the bond forged through their shared ordeal. The newlyweds departed amid cheers and well wishes for the small cabin Vaughn had built on his land, the first structure of what would eventually become the Double-A Ranch, named for their shared initial. The cabin was modest but solid, built with care and attention to detail. Inside, Vaughn had included special touches: bookshelves for Tessa's growing collection, windows positioned to capture the best light for reading, a porch facing west for watching the sunset. Their first year brought challenges, as Vaughn had warned. Building a ranch from scratch required endless hours of backbreaking labor. Tessa learned to manage a household with limited resources, to garden in Montana's short growing season, to assist with calving in the small but growing herd Vaughn had started with Johnson's help. But the challenges brought rewards beyond measure. The satisfaction of creation, of building something together that was entirely their own. The deep partnership that developed between them, each contributing their strengths to their shared dream. And most precious of all, the love that deepened with each passing day, growing stronger through trials and triumphs alike. In their second year, Tessa established a small practice, using her father's medical knowledge to serve the surrounding ranches and homesteads. Word spread of the doctor's daughter at the Double-A who could set bones, deliver babies, and treat illnesses with equal skill. Vaughn built, in addition to their cabin, a small examining room where Tessa could receive patients. By their third anniversary, the Double-A had grown to include 2 hired hands, a modest but healthy herd of cattle, and a reputation for fair dealing throughout the county. And on a crisp autumn day much like the one when they'd first met, Tessa shared news that brought tears of joy to Vaughn's eyes: they would be welcoming their first child in the spring. A son or daughter to inherit all this, Vaughn marveled, his hand gentle on Tessa's still flat stomach as they stood on their porch, surveying their land in the golden afternoon light. A child who will grow up knowing the value of hard work and the importance of integrity, Tessa added, leaning into his embrace. Just like their father. Vaughn pressed a kiss to her temple. And the compassion and courage of their mother. Their son, William Vaughn Ashwood, arrived on a perfect May morning, strong and healthy with a shock of dark hair and his father's remarkable green eyes. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Margaret Rose, who inherited Tessa's honey-brown hair and determined spirit. As the years passed, the Double-A prospered. Vaughn's innovative breeding program improved their stock, while Tessa's medical practice expanded to include training for several young women interested in nursing and midwifery. Their home grew along with their family and fortunes. The original cabin incorporated into a comfortable ranch house that served as a gathering place for friends and neighbors. Silver Creek changed too, growing into a proper town with a bank, a schoolhouse where their children would learn, and eventually a small hospital where Tessa served as consulting physician. William Ainsley remained in his smithy until arthritis forced him to retire, at which point he moved to the AA, becoming the beloved grandfather who taught the Ashwood children to fish, to identify birds, and to appreciate the beauty of Montana's vast skies. On their 20th anniversary, Vaughn surprised Tessa with a journey not back east as she might have expected, but west to the Pacific Ocean, a sight neither had ever seen. Standing on the shores of Oregon, watching the endless waves roll in, Vaughn took her hand in his. "Regrets?" he asked, the question encompassing all the years, all the choices that had brought them to this moment. Tessa looked up at the man who had saved her from a stampede so long ago, whose love had sustained her through births and deaths, triumphs and sorrows, whose partnership had created a legacy that would endure beyond them both. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Every step led me where I was meant to be with you." The stampede that had begun in their hearts that day in 1878 had never truly ended. It had merely transformed into something enduring, a love that, like the Montana landscape they both cherished, was vast, powerful, and eternally wild.